about Beyond OODA, which is Varg Freeborn's latest book. I love this book. It's really interesting, and I suggest everybody go out and buy it. It's really, really good. And there's an audio version, which Varg himself narrated. So I highly recommend it. And I'm really excited to talk about it because I think that this is a really important part of understanding self-defense and self-protection that isn't very well trained. Like it's not touched upon too much in the self-protection training and education. So I'm really excited that I get a chance to talk with Varg about just how to develop it, what it is. This is the second O of OODA, which is the orientation portion, and it is apparently the bedrock of understanding how decisions and actions are created in the heat of the moment. I wanted to start out with a passage from the beginning of the book on page 8 about how being trained to a highly proficient level does not guarantee that the individual will perform well under forced pressure. Second, the lack of training does not guarantee that the individual will not perform well under forced pressure. So I wanted to start there because I thought that was a really interesting way to introduce orientation and what that is and how that affects people's reactions to violence.
Sure. So this is something that we see in patterns in training and also in performance for people who have had training or have not had any training, but get into life-threatening, lethal force events. And we see people perform extremely well who have never had any training. They make fast decisions. They make appropriate decisions rapidly. They adapt to situations and they save themselves or other people, not just in a fight or an attack, but say, rescuing someone from a flash flood or some other type of disaster or, any type of life-threatening, fast-moving situations where we see people with no training act, and they act efficiently and appropriately and successfully. And then at the same time, we see people who are trained, who have had, sometimes an immense amount of training, who will go on to freeze or act inefficiently or inappropriately and not make correct decisions or rapid decisions, or sometimes not make decisions at all. So it comes down to what it does is it negates the belief that training alone is what is going to prepare you. Right? And it completely negates that. And what we see in forced performance is that training is an aid. It helps the situation. It helps the person be prepared, gives them a larger repository of experiences and confidence and a repertoire of procedures and actions that they could choose from, right? But it doesn't guarantee that they're going to be able to access those. And so what we try to do is look at orientation in the sense that it's what really comes down to, it's what it really comes down to in terms of how our decisions are made. Our experiences, our repository of everything that we have accumulated culturally, genetically, and experience-wise over the years of our life that color and shape how we see the world, how we see ourselves, how we see ourselves in relationship to the world around us, how we see situations moving towards us or coming at us very quickly. And then our decisions are made based on those perspectives. And that can be very different. As I've stated before, you can take someone and they'll jump out of an airplane 1,000 times gleefully, and you take another person like myself and will have a heart attack if you throw them out of an airplane, right? Doesn't matter how much safety equipment is attached to me. I don't want to fly out of an airplane. It's not on my list of things to do. And I don't think my heart would take it very well. That being said, it's a perspective issue, right? Because it's the same airplane, the same equipment, the same chances of living and dying. And there's nothing different there from person to person on that same airplane in that same exact moment in time. But it's a perspective issue, right? So it's an orientation issue. The same thing happens with fast moving situations. That's why some people, it's very interesting to me. I observe situations, not just lethal force, but all situations that have fast moving decision making. And anytime I have an opportunity to see this, I'm thinking about what is the person doing? How could they be doing it better? For example, a few years ago, I had a vehicle careen out of control and wreck terribly on the interstate in front of me. I mean, directly in front of us. It was the vehicle right in front of me. The rear tire blew out, and we were in the far left lane, and there was very little shoulder on the left side, very little, not really even enough room to stop, but you could do it, but barely. You'd have to scrape against the guardrail to get over there. In an emergency situation, that's acceptable, right? There's a huge shoulder on the right side, but we're wall-to-wall traffic, and there's 3 lanes of wall-to-wall traffic doing 75 miles an hour. So careening across 3 lanes of traffic with a blown tire at 75 miles an hour is probably not my best choice. Scraping the guardrail at 70 and gliding to a stop along the guardrail on the left side is probably going to be the best choice you have. This person started to go left, realized there was no shoulder, panicked, careened across all 3 lanes of traffic. Amazingly, didn't hit someone, but when they hit the grass on the shoulder, they hit at such an angle that the speed was too great, and it catapulted the vehicle straight up into the air, and it flipped in the air multiple times very rapidly, just slinging stuff everywhere. And then crashed into the ground and rolled more. It was a terrible, terrible accident. And I saw the vehicle fly through the air. It was really, and a woman died in that accident. It was the mother. It was a family that was on vacation from Georgia visiting to Disney World. They were coming back from Disney World, and the grandmother passed away in that accident because I read about it later. But my take on that is, when you're in a fast moving situation and it's quick, like there's no time to really analyze things in a very detailed, drawn out way. You have to make a decision, right? Your experiences and your beliefs about yourself and the world around you are all you have at that moment. That's it. You do not have the assistance of Google or logic or any of the things that you would use, deductive reasoning or whatever you would use to analyze a problem and figure it out in the most efficient way. Those things are not at your disposal. The only thing is rapidly, immediately at your disposal are the things you bring to the moment. And so how we shape that and how we think about that then becomes an important part of training and preparation, not just learning skills and procedures and things like that, but changing not only the way we think, but changing the way we think by changing the inputs that cause what we think. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So how do you determine, so it sounds like orientation is best developed basically by absorbing as much like knowledge and experience as possible. And then you mentioned like in the book that, I mean, obviously violence is something that would be really difficult to absorb by experience. And so that's something that could only be acquired through simulation, I guess. Is that a fair understanding?
I think it's an elementary understanding of it, a good foundation. I think that it gets a lot deeper when we really start to look at it. And you go back to the beginning, the orientation concept is something that I took from Lieutenant Colonel John Boyd, who developed OODA, which is Observe, Orient, Decide, Act. Now, I don't get caught up in OODA loop. I that's not my thing. I don't, even though what I draw from is actually comes out of OODA loop, but it's my personal belief from having studied, over 30 years of Boyd's work and having worked with one of his close colleagues that worked with him on his work and Chet Richards and having him read over my work and then going back and forth with Chet about the thoughts that I've had about Boyd's and his work, and looking also at the work of Chuck Spinney, who was the only other colleague of Boyd's that worked with him on these concepts. It's my belief that the last 20 to 30 years of Boyd's work was really just a narrower and narrower focus on orientation. Like, he really just began to pinpoint on just the concept of orientation being the most, he himself had called it the Schwerpunkt, which is like the most important concept, right? Like, it's the central concept. Everything else branches from this. And that's why I took it up, because I retrospectively look back through my experiences and see these things do apply. This is how this happens. This is what creates decision making. And it's not that hard to figure out. And I know that sociology and psychology have different names for some of these things, but I don't think it covers it in the way that we need to cover it, in particular for our purposes when we're talking about self-defense and rapid, life changing or life threatening experiences. So Boyd almost exclusively dealt with that, because he started with fighter pilots and then he became more engrossed in just the individual aspect of it. So when we look at it, I think it's fair to say that it's, of course, that's the basics of it. The foundation is that it's our experiences and things like that. But just going out and accumulating experience is not going to just fix this automatically, because the rule is that random effort will produce random results. So we have to have learning objectives. We have to have very clear objectives of how we're manipulating our thought processes in order to have the desired outcome of our thought process manipulation, right? So if we just go out to accumulate experiences, in the end, we end up being more experienced, but did that really get us closer to where we wanted to be in terms of making the types of decisions we want to make? And you don't know that unless you designed that experience gathering for that specific end. And I think that force on force classes and things like that have to be designed around specific learning objectives. One of the things I emphasize in the book is, and especially in force on force classes, you have to take the opportunity to allow the student to fail and figure things out on their own, rather than give them the answers and then have them perform the answers. I think that the experience part of it is definitely complete, or more complete, when there's failure and figuring out involved, rather than put a person in a situation with, say, a knife attack, and then they fail and they get stabbed by the attacker, and then you come back and say, hey, okay, well, here's a baseball grab, and here's how you isolate the knife hand, the weapon hand, away from the rest of the body, and blah, blah, blah. And then they go out and they perform that. I think it's more powerful if they are allowed to develop some of these things on their own through the process of learning and exposure, rather than just giving them answers and causing rehearsal. Does that sound like it answers your question?
Sort of. I think I have like two thoughts here. One of them being trying to figure out like where the existing mechanisms for training fit in with the larger goal of like self-protection or self-defense. I mean, because it sounds like for example, when you're learning boxing, or when you're learning like actual physical altercation moves, that is like not even an alphabet. It's something like a bit more elementary than that in some ways. And then as you're building that out, like, all right. So one of the things that I was thinking about was, it sounds like this evolution as a student, from the student's perspective, of going from forms to finding instinctive responses to what's being presented to them, like in the midst of an altercation. And then you moved it even bigger to something called agility. And that agility part, I think, is sort of what you're referring to, what you also refer to as creativity. But it seems a little bit like spongy in concept. So could you like solidify that a little bit?
So decision making without agility is not going to be effective. It's not going to be efficient, right?
Okay, but what do you mean by agility?
Agility is your ability to adapt and change according to the circumstances as they unfold, right? So it's not being rigid. Your thinking is more agile. You can change directions. You can make a decision and then have to change that plan or that decision or that strategy on the fly without following all the way through, because circumstances changed from the time you made the decision to do that to the time you started to act it out. The world changes, right? I go after the knife hand, and he reaches over and grabs it with the other hand, and now I have half of a grab on one hand and the knife is now on the other hand. Agility requires that you're able to change directions, change decisions, change strategies, change procedures on the fly as needed, and not get stuck in a direction and follow through with something when the circumstances as far went past the point where that thing is going to be efficient or effective anymore. So, and Boyd was the one that came up with the whole thing about good decision making without agility is pretty much is useless, right? It's not going to be effective in a fast moving situation. Agility, creativity is part of agility, and that is true. But agility in your decision making is what allows you to be fluid. You know, it's like if you go back to Bruce Lee talking about being like water in a fight and you know, things like that. What he's talking about is agility, not just in your physical movements, but agility in your ability to recognize the situation, synthesize the information, and change directions as needed, right? To not be rigid in your planning or execution. And that's where agility comes in.
Okay, so it is essentially adaptability in that situation, or
Yes.
is it okay? Yeah, I was also like, could we go into a little bit about the analysis and synthesis portion and the destruction portion being important in developing orientation?
Sure.
I got that.
So, what specifically would you like to talk about? Because analysis and synthesis are pretty straightforward. You analyze situations and you synthesize new information with information that you already know to come up with perspectives or decisions based on the new information that comes out of that. And destruction is basically the ability, it's destruction and creation, the ability to destroy rigid or former ideas to make room for new ideas from synthesized information coming in. And this is something that's, yeah, so that's something that's practiced from, you know, Steve Jobs was a big on talking about that. A lot of the schools of psychology today are starting to deal with the ability to bend or break rules that we have developed or adapted to culturally or through whatever learning system or method that we've been taught. The ability to bend and break rules, to come up with new concepts, to think outside of the box, to be, you know, all these things mean the same thing. It's just the destruction of that which is rigid or what we may have conformed ourselves to before, in order to make room for creativity and synthesis to allow new ideas to develop out of those.
Okay, so it's like learning and unlearning, like as experiences develop.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
I would say that's accurate.
Okay. Let's see.
Those are some pretty in-depth questions.
These are?
Those are some-
Oh, sorry. What were you saying?
I said those are some pretty in-depth questions. So if we need to go any farther on any of that, I mean, there's a lot to talk about in all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm part of it. Like, I was thinking about how, like in Cali class, we talk a lot about OODA, and in terms of like, you attack, you're disrupting the opponent or the partner's ability to understand what you're going to do next. And I feel like that's not the kind of thought process that you're describing in the book. That you're describing something larger than the fight itself. It's like even before an altercation occurs, like you're reading the person, you're managing their perceptions of who you are and what you're capable of. And so a lot of that seems to happen like even before like the physical, violent altercation or confrontation happens.
I think that we shouldn't separate the two like that. I think what you're seeing, I'm bringing the bigger picture concept. And what I'm trying to say is that the things that you see happening or that you've been taught are happening inside of a fight are actually happening far beyond that in a much bigger way. And when you recognize that, you're going to be much better in the fight as well. So if I'm reading the situation and beginning to manipulate perceptions and manage perceptions, even coming into the initial contact or the initial confrontation, am I not setting myself up to disrupt, what we call disrupting the OODA loop in the fight much better by coming into it manipulatively much earlier, right? Because we're manipulating perception. You're talking about when people say disrupting an OODA loop, what you're trying to do is basically disrupt their plans and decision processes from what they thought, because you're counting on them to not be agile, so they can't adapt quickly. And what's happening is they create a plan, they create a decision to make an action. It's rigid. They go for it, you disrupt it, and now they have to go back through this process again. So on one hand, I'm showing you that you don't have to be easy to disrupt that way, because you can do these things with agility and analysis, synthesis, and destruction. But you also can begin to disrupt someone much earlier than you think, because you don't have to wait until fists and knives are flying to start this process. These things are something that you begin thinking about far before you even meet the person.
Could you give an example of like a scenario of what you mean by that?
Okay, so an example would be like I give the example in the book of the ex-convict that I meet in the park, right? And there's every indication that he had ill intent that day, and he definitely was trying to corner me, and I definitely was camouflaged and didn't look like someone he should be concerned about. I looked more like a target than I did, a predator or anything like that. So knowing all of this going into it, and understanding also ex-convicts, because I am one, and understanding what the ex-con mentality is like, and understanding the split that we took, where I went on and developed a more prosperous life and stayed out of the way of law enforcement, whereas the person I'm going to encounter, before I ever encounter this person, I already know that they took the other path. I already know so many things about this person, because I know we both came from the same place, and I know the struggles and the trials that took place between me and him that caused him to go right and me to go left. So I already know so much about this person going into it, that I'm able to bring that into it before I even meet this person. I'm able to bring that to it. So when I do come across and have contact with this person, I'm already coming in with this much knowledge and this much ability to synthesize what's happening with what I already know, rather than learning new stuff. Like if someone who had never been to prison, never had contact with ex-cons, encounters the ex-con in the park, they're not bringing anything that they can synthesize new information to. They're actually learning on the fly more than synthesizing and creating, right? They're not actually balancing this against things that they know. They're actually learning new things, and that's a disadvantage to them. That's not an advantageous position to be in. What is more advantageous is being able to come in and understand things so far ahead of the game that you're able to come in and manage perceptions very early because you understand so much about the person that you're dealing with, and the information that's coming at you is more familiar to you, right? So that's an example of being able to come in and disrupt much earlier than waiting until we're in a fight and then I'm trying to foil his plans to stab or shoot me.
Mm.
It's preferable also.
It kind of reminds me of what you had said in the last interview that we had, or maybe it was in the in the first book, about how fighting is essentially just communication.
Yes.
So if you look at it as like the self-defense part isn't the fight, actually, it's the entire communication that you're having with that person.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. That's really, I mean, if we could all see it that way, I think there would be less fights.
But I also find that really interesting. So I come also from, a background of just very passive nonviolence, like growing up in California, parts of it, the suburban parts of it, where, when people encounter violence like that, they just think, oh, that person has a bad day. And so their ability to develop orientation is sort of crippled by that, right? Like, because you're not necessarily, or you as in them, are not necessarily curious about like why that person is motivated the way that they are. I mean, like, like there's like this established understanding of like, oh, like that person has a bad day, or, maybe like they come from like poverty. And so this is how they're surviving. And if you just talk to them in a humane way, that like none of this violence would happen. And it's just a very like naive way to look at it. But then looking at it from like the self-defense instruction side, when I read like stuff that people are saying online, the way that they present violence, unfolding is that, oh, that other person just so crazy, and they have like no regard for like human life, and they're both kind of true, but like only partially, it seems like.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. There's something about that where it seems like the orientation there isn't complete. I don't know if orientation at that point is the right word, but
it's all orientation. Everyone has orientation, and whether it's developed for, efficient use in fighting, or, efficient decision making in the corporate world, or whatever it is, they develop that. And people get really good at things, and other things that have nothing to do with fighting. Like, for example, in their job or their career, or in the track of their life that they've chosen to pursue their visions or their dreams of how they want their life to be. A lot of people, very successfully will shape their orientation to be able to make the decisions necessary to achieve those things. So this isn't something that's just exclusively for violence, and it's not something that's exclusively for people that, are consciously developing it. I think people are developing these things quite, we're describing a process that is natural, and it can be manipulated, but it's not always manipulated very consciously, as it is where people are just doing the things, they are accumulating the experiences and trying to learn how to make the decisions that's going to give them the reward of the thing that they want, right? Like, this is a very natural process for people, and it's true for you if you're trying to learn how to better manage violence or dangerous situations. It's true for the person who's trying to build a career in, corporate world or archaeology or whatever it is that they're doing, right? And it's true for the bad guy who's trying to get better at, at hurting people. Like, it's the same process for everybody, and it's one of the central themes that I'm trying to illustrate, is that they're not that different than you. The process that we all use to arrive at decisions is the same process. Now, I'm removing obvious mental illness from that, right? If there's obvious mental illness, it's another issue, right? But just because someone's willing to kill someone without remorse does not denote mental illness. It just denotes a different value system, and that could be it. It could be really just it. They just have a different value system, and their valuation of human life is more selective than yours. But that doesn't mean they're mentally ill, and it doesn't mean that they're thinking in some way that you're not capable of. They're arriving at their decisions the same way you are, and they're using the same processes that you use, which gives you the ability, once you realize this and you've mastered those processes within inside yourself, now you're more capable of disrupting that person because you have a more complete, in-depth understanding of them, and you understand their weaknesses or vulnerabilities, that the likely weaknesses or vulnerabilities that they may have, because you have conquered those or understand those in yourself.
Yeah. I kind of want to steer away from the violence context for a minute, because the part where you talked about growing up in an impoverished community, I feel is so golden for people to read and understand. And I think my experience with that was when I was younger, I used to volunteer a lot with low income kids, where their understanding of life is so different from mine, and so wanting to help them, it really did feel like an orientation problem. Well, for me, to understand
Yes.
where they're coming from and their values and stuff like that, but then for them to in order for them to even rise up in life to a better place, there was so much stuff that they didn't understand about, the security of my life, that was just so difficult.
So first of all, you can be the first to hear that the next book that I'm currently working on is about exactly that.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, it steers off of the violence topic, and it's dealing specifically with that exact problem that you just talked about. The whole book is about that problem. And so what I'll say about that is it's true. And it is an orientation problem. It's not just as simple as saying people know right from wrong. They could make better life decisions. It's not that simple.
Yeah.
And it infuriates me when I hear people, especially people of privilege, say things like, well, they should have just made better decisions in their life. And, it's a complex problem. And I was one of those people. And I didn't understand. It took me until past 40 years old before I even understood really how to manage money or understand how money actually works, or, understanding how associations really are detrimental, can be detrimental when you choose the wrong associations. And sometimes, very typically, in those impoverished lives, associations are detrimental, and there's no choice, right? You have alcoholic fathers, drug addicted family members, mentally ill mothers, friends you grow up with, drugs, alcohol, violence, criminality. All of these things are very entwined in those societies, those subcultures, right? And there's no, when people say things like, well, from a position of privilege, you can, think this or that. And I'm like, there's nothing about my skin color or my being a male or anything at all that saved me from being born to a 16-year-old mother who was not prepared to raise a child, and that did not save me from being born into a drug house, a violent drug house, which is where I grew up in. And so those are choices that are made that affect your life that you didn't make. You definitely can blame those on other people. That is something in your life you can say, that's not my fault, right? And so there's a lot of things that happen that are just that shape a person's orientation, and they cause them to, choose associations are that are detrimental or counterproductive to them. And it might be because you grow up with dysfunctional relationships in your life and your family, and so you choose a partner who's dysfunctioning. Now you have this dysfunctional relationship, or you choose codependency, or you choose you know co-drug addiction or co-alcoholism, or whatever it is that you grew up with, this familiarity. You keep that familiarity in your life, and you continue to choose toxic associations that continue. And the problem is that you might think that you're doing, I've seen a lot of people who think they're doing the right things. They get up, go to work every day. They're not doing drugs, they're not drinking, but they're still associating themselves and letting themselves be dragged into this cycle to where they can't escape it through their associations. And that's just one example. And that's probably one of the biggest ones, because a lot of people have the desire to change, but they don't have the perspectives or the knowledge or the understanding of how to do it. And they're trapped in cycles through their associations where they can't escape. And I think that's all an orientation problem, and it's all making decisions based on their experiences or our perspective of the world or genetics. Like, all of these things play into it. So yes, that's what the next book's about.
So I'm curious, like, how do you help? I don't know, like, it's weird, like, reading this book has kind of drawn me into like all these memories of like wanting to help these kids, like seeing like they're all so intelligent. Sorry. They're all like super intelligent. There's like no, when you grow up hearing like, oh, you can do anything, anybody can do anything, like if you just work hard at it. And these kids are like they're trying to work hard at something that's not really going to get them there, and you don't really know how to help them. Like,
Yeah,
maybe I'm going off topic. Sorry.
No, that's a huge thing, and I can see that that affects you deeply. And believe me, it affects me deeply. It's very emotional for me writing this new book and talking about experiences of my own, where I go back and look at where associations held me back, or just once, like, I can point out single decisions in my life where I thought I was doing the right thing destroyed 20 years of my life. Just utterly destroyed it, financially, emotionally, and inescapable 20 years of destruction based on one decision that just I thought I was doing the right thing. It's not like a lot of people think you make bad choices because you go out, or you getting drunk and you partying and you get in trouble, or you get somebody pregnant, or just all this stuff, and they just think it's like bad choices, when in reality the terrible truth of it is that a lot of times these kids, or even adults in some circumstances, are really, really trying to make the best choice, and they're doing the best they can with what they have to work with decision making wise. And a it's like their mind is a shovel that just keeps digging them deeper and deeper, and every decision they think is going to get them out of it is actually a decision that's going to screw them more. And this is, on the simplest level, we can say that by looking at people who um were criminals and get in trouble, and then they try to go straight, and they get a job and they're working, and then they end up having a baby, and they're like, oh man, I got to take care of my kid, and and I'm just broke, and I'm living paycheck to paycheck. And so they think, I'm gonna go out and hit one more lick and just get set up for my kid, and then they get caught and they go to prison, right? That's a simplistic way of looking at it, like, and that does happen. But there's the guy who doesn't make the decision to go out and get in trouble, or make one more robbery, or make one more drug deal. There's the guy that just keeps working paycheck to paycheck, and he's smothering and drowning in this unending cycle of just not having prosperity, not having success, not getting ahead, not getting out of poverty. And there's no one to help because nobody gives a shit. Nobody cares. And it's one of the things that I see, especially in the self-defense industry. They have actual t-shirts that say nobody cares, work harder on them. And I'm like, man, screw you. Like that whole attitude just sucks. And because it's one of the most toxic things in our society is the lack of care that people have about, like, oh, it's not working out for you, work harder, because I've watched people work themselves into um, a depressive, slow death because they just believed so much in that work hard mantra. Like, just work hard and it'll happen. Work hard. And I've watched people that I cared about work themselves to actual death and misery because all they believed in was if they just worked hard enough, they could get out of it. But it was the other decisions they were making that were the problem. And it's an orientation problem because they don't understand that their associations. They don't understand, my mother worked herself to death and died in a depression. She died miserable, and for 20 years, she just descended into madness. And I watched as my mother slipped away, and there was nothing I could do about it. And it wasn't because she didn't work hard. Before she got hurt, she was never addicted to drugs or alcohol. She worked super hard. She was always a proud woman. But she married a drunk and a drug addict, and he destroyed everything financially that she would work for. Any opportunity for prosperity would be destroyed by him and his addictions and his problems. She would go to work hard. He would piss it away. And, she never made the choice to get rid of him. She stayed. And so it was like, it's like taking water from a well, but your bucket has holes in it. But all day you stand there just pulling the bucket up. And and by the time the bucket gets up to the top, there's no water, but you put it right back down there. And because you believe this time I'm going to get some water. And this is what people do. That's what my mother did. And that's what, for many years I did. And this is the problem. If you think that shaping your orientation for violence or something like that is a priority, maybe, some people need to take a look. Maybe you need to shape your orientation for your whole life decisions, your associations, and how you're conducting your entire life, and not just when you're under high stress situations. But also, if you feel like you're somebody that makes all these good decisions, you had the benefit of having great examples in life, or you were just born perfect and had this amazing genetics that somehow you're just awesome, like everybody tells you they are on social media, then you could at least take the time to understand this, to understand other cultures, that and subcultures that go through these problems, and they don't have those perfect perspectives, and understanding simple things like money and relationships, and how to get yourself from one point to another point in life. They don't understand those. They don't have a frame of reference for those things. You could understand another culture because you might have to deal with one of those people someday.
Yeah.
And that's how you get ahead of the curve and begin to manipulate and manage perceptions, by understanding that person, their story, the story they're telling themselves, and the likely real story that they come from.
So is your next book going to be like your book just before political office, like the large one? I know that you've been in politics, like.
I have no desire. I have no belief that the system can be changed from within.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I do not believe that the system can be changed within. I think that the system is so corrupt and grown out that it's only going to be outside pressure, in whatever form that comes in, that the system is too well entrenched and insulated within itself. It's corrupt. I think maybe on your local, like you can maybe make a difference in your city or something like that, and that's good, and you should do that if you can. I don't think you're going to change what they do in Washington. There's too much money. There's way too much money involved.
Fair. Yeah. So looking at, there are just so many different ways in which I could like extrapolate from your book. I mean, thinking about, national or international politics and how a lot of the wars that we have and a lot of the international movement is kind of an orientation problem as well, right? Like, I don't know, maybe that's a little bit too grandiose for this conversation.
Let's say this real quick because I want to put my opinion out there. It's an orientation problem, but the problem is that your perception is being managed and you don't know it.
Mm.
That's what I think. I think that the corporations and the profiteers who make billions and billions of dollars off of bombing people are the ones who benefit the most. And I think that when certain people are in office, we're not bombing people. And as soon as we get other people in office, we're right back to bombing people. Kind of shows you like who's associated with who in terms of making money. And as long as everybody's angry at each other about masks and, whether you're Asian or black or white and male, female, or whatever you are, if we're all mad about stuff like that, then your perception is easy to manage and somebody can keep making money. That's what I think.
Everybody's trying to manage everybody else's perceptions, seems like.
Yes. And I think the media is doing a really good job of managing like a large portion of this country's perception.
All right. So back to the book. Let's see. Shaping orientation as a teacher. Okay, so you did give the example of you do a lot of like live simulation. So if not knowing anything about how you train people as an instructor, like how do you what is your I guess like process? What's the best way to put it? Like it seems like a lot of like instructors, and this is probably because I'm a product of the martial arts community. Our instruction starts with if somebody does this, these are the options that you can do, and then then they'll respond like this, and then you do this, right? So there is a little bit of adaptability, but there isn't like this is how you got into that situation in the first place. And is that where you start your training from? Like how do you develop your students' orientation? Like do you give them things to read? Like what how do you build that?
I've pretty much come to exclusively doing force on force training. I haven't done any courses this year at all. I've been busy with getting this second book out, and I took a break from teaching for a while. I will be teaching here in a couple weeks in Utah, just lecture. But I haven't done any active training this year because I want to take some time to really think about this. But the last year or two of training was pretty much force on force. And what I like to do is present the student with as many opportunities for them to free think as possible. Because I think free thinking, as opposed to if he does this, you do that approach, I think free thinking really allows the student to both fail and to figure things out. And I think that no lesson is learned as well as the lesson that you earned. So what I mean by that is that the one you had to work for to get right is the one that's going to stick with you, right? And so when I put students in participants in situations, my scenarios don't have a scripted outcome. There's many possible outcomes, and my guys are prepared for those in whatever way they'll go. And I've got a couple of really good guys that have worked with me, have worked under me for several years, over 5 years. And I raised both of them up from when they were teenagers and couldn't even own a pistol. Now they're both cops, and one of them is like on the SWAT team and is working on being his, the training officer of his department already. And guys I've watched like grow over the years, and they're very tuned into how I want things, and they're very tuned into the decision making patterns that people genuinely will make, and they can kind of predict the behavior, which is the point of the training, right? One of the points is to be able to predict behavior accurately so that you can disrupt it and be ahead of the curve. And they're at that point, whereas my students might be coming once or twice a year. If that, I might see people one time. So I need them to get the most in a 2-day class. I need them to get the most experience they can, where we will go into a shoot house and I'll be up on the catwalk watching from a bird's eye view. And I will enter a guy into the room to create a problem or create a situation. Now, the person who is the target of the situation, the student who's learning in that scenario, they can make several choices. They can communicate. They can attempt to disrupt. They can flee. There's so many different options they're going to have, and this makes it very realistic in giving them the opportunity to free think. But we talk about principles. So I brief everyone on principles. I brief everyone on principles of fighting, principles of fighting inside a structure, but also principles of communication, right? And understanding unfolding situations and looking at behaviors and, trying to pick options and look at what options you have in a situation.
Mm-hmm.
Can I make it out the door? Is it ethical for me to make it out the door? Am I leaving someone behind? Am I leaving someone I care about behind? Am I exposing other innocent people to danger if I do A? Am I exposing myself to danger if I do B? Can I weigh this out morally? There's so much that goes into it. And giving them the opportunity to go through it and then stop. Everybody look up at me. Let's talk about what just happened. Why did you make the decision you made, first of all? How many people got shot? Where did you get shot at? Where did you intend to shoot him? How successful were you in your actions that you chose to do? And what do you think you could do better? Or would you change anything if you had it to do again? And setting those up like that is the way that really gives the person the most earned lessons that they really worked for. And they really, people get really stressed out and they get in there and they're like, holy shit, man, that was terrible. Like I didn't know what to do. And oh man, I had, and I get people to come with their wives and, and I put them both in situations, either home defense or out in public, when they obviously carry guns together, or at least one of them carries a gun, and they've never rehearsed this stuff. They just think, oh, it's going to go this way. And then when I present it to them, they're like, holy shit, man, this is totally nothing like I thought it was going to be. Like I didn't know I was going to have to make like all these decisions, and then this, and they get disrupted, right? And I set up my guys to disrupt them all the time, right? And they're disrupting their OODA, so to speak, right? Or I tell my guys, I'm like, if they make this decision, let them go, like let them get away with it. And I just want to see where they're going to go, but just give them an opportunity. And I also let people fail. Like I don't teach any of my people to die. Like if you're a good guy in any of my scenarios, you never get to lay down and just quit, right? But you do get shot a lot, and that it probably would have been bad if it was real bullets. So you have to learn from that, right? And you have to learn that, okay, that was not successful, right? Like I fought through, yeah, I feel good, but probably would have died if that was for real. So I need to change what I'm doing there. And that's the kind of learning that I've come to really enjoy giving to people. And I just have no desire to stand on a square range anymore and be like, fire, okay, reload. And like, there's guys that are way better at that than me anyway. And I just can't do it anymore. The monotony of it. And it's just, so the force on force in scenarios and giving people the opportunity to fail and free think and figure it out. That's the way I like to approach it.
So something that I thought was really interesting You mentioned that in Boyd's like later work, he actually doesn't show the OODA loop as a loop anymore, or even as a series process. It's kind of like the stages of grief, where it could be any stage in any particular order. So I mean, I think it sounds like the goal of the training is to, hold on. Sorry, I don't know if you could hear my dog again. So it sounds like the goal of the training is to basically shorten the amount of time that it takes to have to consider everything, because everything has already been considered and you just know what to do next. It's like building out like this tree of protocols, proper protocols or something like that. Is that about accurate?
Yeah, that just gives you it gives you a repertoire, and you can choose from that at any point in the process. It's just a complex series of loops. You could be at any point in there, and orientation is at the center of all of it. Like it all branches out from there, and you can tap back into that at any point in the process.
So orientation is essentially understanding of that scenario or something.
It is, yeah. Orientation creates our understanding. It's what creates your understanding of the world, of yourself, and of how you fit into that world.
All right. So how do you maintain that sense of orientation? Like, I mean, how do you, all right. Again, I'm like thinking into like international politics, because like I have a mentor who, her whole like life mission in her career was to prevent strategic surprise, for the nation. And so like my thinking of that was like my introduction into the OODA loop, was like, oh, this is why we have like intelligence and research and all that stuff. And so we would never be caught by surprise.
But organizational orientation is absolutely a thing. I think it's the same exact thing for entities or organizations, nations, companies, units. It's collective, but it works in the same way. And I think an organization can have a culture, it can have experiences, it can have all of these things drive its decision making, right? So when you have a country that's very nationalistic and the people are very nationalistic, right? They're going to make decisions that are pretty typical of a nationalistic type of country. And so, culturally and their experience, their confidence in where they are, how they feel about their value system, how they value their own existence as compared to the existence of other countries, other nations, all those things are going to color their decisions. So it's the same exact thing on a collective basis. And that's exactly what Chet Richards writes about in his book, Certain to Win. He takes the OODA concept and orientation and applies it to an organizational level for business. And that's a business book using OODA and orientation at a business organization level. Yeah. And I think it steps up from there. And the same thing can apply to nations and to international politics and everything.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to say in your book that you haven't or didn't? Because I noticed that your book kind of like, it just like ended on like a very specific thought, and then there was like no like conclusion, like overall blah blah blah, like
yeah. And I had to end it that way, and I know it's it feels like a cliffhanger there, but it's just the way the book had to end, because it's a very specific book, and it's not, I'm not telling you what to think. I'm just telling you like how to get there. Yeah. And you have to be the one that the conclusion of the book is in your head, right? It's not, I don't write that part, you write that part, Oh,
that's super interesting.
Yeah. Like the rest of it is for you to come up with based on what you read and what you've experienced. And there's nothing else I can add to that at the end. I can't sit down and say, okay, so here's how you should think, right? Like it's I've handed off to you, like, and there you go. All right, there's the information. You do what you can do with it, and that's up to you. And I felt weird writing it like that, because usually I'm kind of like as a writer, I'm like a big punch kind of guy. Like I end with like boom, the big uppercut, right? And I didn't this time, and it really felt weird to me to do it that way. But like I said, um, you know, it's up to the reader to do that part.
Oh, it's super awesome. Well, I really enjoyed the book. I want to again promote it. It's Beyond OODA by Varg Freeborn. Definitely get it. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. This was an excellent conversation. Even though it didn't stay on the self-defense topic, but it was so good.
yeah, no, it was fun. I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed being able to talk about, because actually today, most of the day I spent writing in the new book, so it was nice to be able to talk about that for a minute. Because I'm hoping that goes over well. I'm reaching for a much bigger audience outside of just the violence and self-defense, so I might lose some of the violence and self-defense audience, but I'm hoping to gain a lot more of a wider audience on that one. So
I'm actually super curious about your thoughts about that problem of how do we solve the problem of solve the problem of trying to bring out people from impoverished communities who don't want to be there.
I think if you don't understand this part of the problem, nothing you do is ever going to be successful. And I talk about that in the book. I was the 14-year-old kid when the ex-con preachers came to the juvenile jail and was like, who's going to prison? Yeah, this guy right here. I can do that shit. No problem. I'm the toughest guy in this room, and you weren't
doing it out of rebellion. That was literally
no, it was literally I can rise to that challenge, this is a challenge, and it's just that's a value system problem. That's the things that you value and glorify are out of whack there, right? You don't have, your value system isn't put together in a way that's going to be conducive for you to make decisions that are going to be good for your future. If you glorify violence and glorify things like, being able to survive prison and get out and be this jack dude that went to prison and now you're tough, if you think that's cool, you're screwed, and if as a person who's trying to help somebody like that, you look at that and all you can say is, oh no, you shouldn't think that way. Let me tell you that's not going to help, right? They're going to be like, hey, it's just not going to reach that person. So you have to figure out what you're looking at first and look at it from an orientation perspective. And then you can start to understand that, what he's saying is bad because his inputs are bad. So let's look at the inputs. I can't change his inputs. The inputs are already there, and much of them are embedded from years of experience. So I have to create inputs that counter those inputs or directly attack those inputs. It's like I have to give this person antibodies to this virus they have, right? And I can't do that by just saying, hey, get rid of that virus, right? Stop being sick, right? That doesn't work. And the same thing with thoughts. You can't say if someone's been trained or, raised to think a certain way, you can't say, stop thinking that way, and you don't understand when they don't stop thinking that way. And you're like, but I told you to stop thinking that way. It's not that easy. So you have to understand, at a deeper level, I think we need to understand. I had a gym open for a while, and when I moved to Florida, I packed my gym up and brought it with me. And then when I got here, I bought another boxing gym out and added all that equipment. So I have all this equipment sitting, and I want to move to Daytona Beach, which is semi-rough place, and there's a lot of poverty and stuff in that area. And one of the things I want to do is open my place back up eventually and offer some help to troubled kids or kids that are endangered for those types of reasons, whether poverty or crime and things like that. Because I think there's outlets. And what I mean by input, so to give an example, I think by the antibody inputs that I talk about, right, to go in and counteract the bad inputs. like one of the things that I think worked for me was strength training and, and combat training and stuff like that. I was exposed to strength training very early in prison, and it changed my life. And it was something that I went on to, after prison, become a professional trainer full time for several years. And then I still to this day run an online training program on the side that I train people in general strength development, because I fully believe in it. But where would I be if that influence had never come into my life? Like prior to that, it was violence glorification and all of these types of things. And then I have this like positive thing to come in my life where I'm like accomplishing something. And I went from 130 pounds to 200 pounds, and that's a huge change, man. Like when you become a different person for real, like I'm now a 70-pound heavier, different person. I've worked very hard to get to this point. And there was a process, and I had to learn things, and I had to learn programming and periodization and, recovery and all of these different concepts and all the things I had to study and research and be taught by guys that knew more than me. And so that created a positive, and this positive, was big enough to outweigh a lot of the negatives, right? That's how you do it. You have to give other opportunities, other things that are going to create this, that they're going to tap and unlock the drive and the ability to accomplish something. And I think that more than anything else, everybody, even people who don't have kids that are in trouble, having a kid accomplish some type of mastery before they're 18 is vital. It's vital. Like I don't care if it's horse riding or archery or a music instrument or a sport, like they have to have something where they've worked hard, they've felt defeat, they've felt like giving up, they've overcome it, they've overcome adversity, they've worked hard, and then they've gotten monotonous and they felt like bored, like they weren't going anywhere, and they still worked hard and they got through it, and then they got reward and they got great at something. Like I don't care what it is, they don't have to be the best at it. There just has to be some sense of accomplishment, because the process that we use for accomplishment and overcoming adversity to get to a goal and change ourselves or get better at something is transposable to anything in life. If you did something, like if you did this on playing guitar when you were a kid, you can do the same thing when you go to college and you're learning engineering, right? The same process. The same process applies to, becoming a good parent or whatever career you choose. But that process of mastery is the same no matter what situation and topic you're going after. And I think that getting that to someone is probably the biggest thing, right? So that's my take on like how we do it, but I think it's a complex problem that requires great understanding, which is not always available.
Not pretty common sense. All right. Well, cool. I'm going to end it here, but do you have any last words to say before I end it off?
Nope. I just, I appreciate everybody who buys the book, and, it's a deep thinking book. So you're probably not going to develop any like real solid ideas about it right after the first time you read it. You're going to have to think about it for a while, but, I enjoyed writing it, and I hope that, people get a lot of value from it. Just take the time to try to absorb it. It's the only advice I can give.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much. I know I enjoyed the book. I am really excited. I've been giving out different passages to people because I'm like, you guys should read this. It's so good. So yeah, I'm really excited. Thank you for talking about it with me. And I'm going to end the recording here. So bye, everybody.